What I have in my hand is a sample of what a voting machine looked like back in the day. You would pull the lever for whatever you wanted to vote for. Your vote would be locked in and the curtain would be open so you could leave.
Lynette found this in her grandfather's home in St. Petersburg. It's more than a fascinating relic. It represents a man who empowered his community. My name is Jennifer Glenfield, and this is the first episode in a series about Florida's untold, overlooked, and underreported histories. In this video, we'll talk about the Black vote in St. Petersburg.
He recognized early that between voting and education, those were the pathways for the African American to succeed.
Black voter turnout in the city is 10% over the national average. That's been true for generations. The story of Chester James Sr. shows us why.
He loved his family. He was a definite family man. And he loved people. And there was nothing he would not do for you. We called him Chief.
Now, why did they call him Chief?
Because that's who he thought he was, a chief. He was in charge.
In 1870, the 15th Amendment gave Black Americans the right to vote, and for 13 years they did. But the decade James is born begins a century of widespread voter suppression.
Between the 1880s and about 1910, every southern state institutes a series of disfranchisement methods. And the first state to do so is Mississippi. It's called the Mississippi Plan. It spreads all across the South, including Florida.
There were poll taxes and something called grandfather clauses, a rule that said you couldn't vote if your grandfather didn't vote before 1866, 4 years before Black people were given the right.
So you never mention race, but actually you're disfranchising Blacks without having to disfranchise whites. So by 1910, Blacks who had voted as high as 70% of registered voters is down less than 10%.
In 1911, a 27-year-old James moved to St. Petersburg from Ocala. He settled in Methodist Town, named for its churches. With his wife, Rachel, they established the first private school there.
Florida, although it was not a part of the Deep South, had a very rigid cradle-to-grave Jim Crow system. So, for example, in Florida, which is one of the most extreme laws passed in any of the southern states, even the school textbooks that were used in the Black schools and the white schools could not be stored in the same warehouse.
St. Petersburg was physically segregated by residential patterns to a higher extent than nearly any other city in the US, second only to Chicago. But the Black community voted in higher numbers than any other city in Florida.
But now Blacks voted in smaller numbers than whites did, but they were never completely pushed out of the political system.
In 1937, the year the poll tax was repealed, a police chief with ties to the Black community faced a vote that would remove him from office.
The political establishment was against him, and they called upon the Ku Klux Klan, which was a very big chapter here, to march through the Black community with their robes and their burning crosses and to say, "Don't you dare try to vote tomorrow."
Over 200 Klansmen marched on the South Side, joined by delegations from Sarasota, Clearwater, and Lakeland. They threatened that two men, not necessarily Klansmen, would be at every polling station to take a photo of any Black person that cast a vote.
And Blacks voted in huge numbers. Now he lost, but they stood up to the Klan.
The one who won had to recognize how powerful we were.
For St. Petersburg, it was a turning point, and James emerged a force. His community would later be renamed Jamestown in his honor.
He was one of the most revered leaders of the Black community for 25, 30 years, and one of the people who really advocated political action.
He would ride up and down the street on the back of a big truck with a megaphone, telling people to go out and vote. He went in the homes and showed people how they should vote.
Along with Ralph Wimbish and the local doctors and dentists, were kind of pillars of the NAACP chapter, which challenged Spa Beach in the mid-50s, tried to desegregate it and try to open the pool.
In 1963, he earned a service award from the NAACP, and in 1964, he was honored by President Lyndon Johnson. At the time, the census reported just over 24,000 black residents. James registered 1,000 of them.
You know, when the Selma and Montgomery March took place in Alabama in 1965, and the voting projects moved into central Alabama, there were whole counties there that were more than 80% black who had no registered voters at all in the black community. That never happened here.
It's not all the time about, for African Americans, who they vote for. It's that we vote. Too many people have worked so very hard and died so that we could have the right to vote. And we're talking about, my vote don't count. Oh, it don't matter who I vote for. You know, they ain't. No. We've got to read our ballots, be informed about what's going on, and vote. Because they slip stuff right by you. It slip it right by you. You won't even realize it's been done. Well, when did they do that? Last election. Oh, I didn't know that. Did you vote?